I'm a 25-year-old female, and this happened about 2 months ago. I went to visit an old friend from high school that I hadn't seen in quite a long time. I was in town for about a week and staying in a hotel that was about 10 minutes away. At about midnight, I called an Uber to go back to my hotel. I went outside and waited by the side of the road in a fairly populated area. My friend came outside to talk to me as I waited. We chatted a little bit longer until she said that my Uber ride was there and pointed at a car pulling up. A car was on the side of the road parked in front of us, so I hugged my friend goodbye and got into the back seat. The driver was a man about 30 years old. He said hi to me in a very friendly voice and smiled. Then he asked me where I was going again. I got really confused. I told him my hotel, and then he started nodding his head and said that he got it. Then he saw my phone and got really excited about how I had the latest iPhone. He said he was planning on getting one himself. I had just gotten it about a month prior, and I really liked it. He asked if he could take a quick look at it. I handed it to him, and he examined it. Then he began driving with one hand and looking at it with the other. This was a little bit strange to me, but he seemed nice, so I didn't say anything. But then he just kept driving with my phone in his hand. It started to feel really awkward. I asked him what he thought of the phone, hoping he would give it back to me. He just said that he liked it, but kept driving and holding on to it as well. Finally, I said to him, "You can give me my phone back now." He laughed a little and said, "I'll give it back to you in a minute. What are you worried about?" I just didn't understand what he was doing, and it seemed pretty odd to me. Then he pulled off the main road onto a much quieter one. I didn't really know the city all that well because I wasn't from around there, but I just started getting a bad feeling. We drove in silence for about another minute, and then I leaned up and said to him that I needed my phone because I actually had to make a call. But this time he didn't laugh or smile, and he didn't even answer me at all. He just kept driving and held the phone close to him. Then he pulled the car onto another road that was even quieter. He drove a little ways and then pulled the car over to the side of the road. The bad feeling that I had got even worse. I asked him why he was stopping again. He didn't answer me with my phone still tightly in his hand. He turned around and looked at me. Then he locked the doors from the front and smiled at me in a terrible way. I saw him start to crawl into the back seat with me. All I could say was no. His smile got bigger as he approached. Then he reached out for me. I backed against the end of my seat and kicked at him to defend myself. I got a few good kicks on him before he started to grab the end of my legs. I was struggling as much as I could, but he was beginning to overpower me. I kept trying to fight as best as I could. Just then, my phone started to ring, which was still in his hand. It startled him momentarily. In that split second, I kicked my legs back towards me and then forward as hard as I could. I was able to kick him in the head. It wasn't the hardest kick, but it was enough to knock him to the other side of the seat. When he did, I reached for the door to unlock it and then opened the door. I got out and ran off down the street. I heard the car door open, so I ran into the grass on the side of the road instead. There were a few trees and a little hill. I ran up that hill and then kept running. Eventually, I made it to a busier street that had a gas station on it. I looked behind me, and the man was not chasing me. So I ran inside the gas station and asked them to call the police. I waited there until they came. When the police arrived, we went back to the scene to find my iPhone smashed on the side of the road. It looked like it had been run over by a car, and the screen was destroyed. It turns out the man wasn't even my Uber driver. He had just seen me on the side of the road and pretended to be my driver. When my friend realized I had gotten in the wrong car, she tried texting me, and when I didn't reply, she called me. Her call may have saved me that night. In the year 2014, I frequently used the app Uber because I wasn't able to drive for 12 months due to some DUI charges. Just a stupid mistake overall. There's this nightclub bar in my town that I would sometimes go to on the weekends with my friends. Sometimes I would get a ride home with a designated driver if we had one, and sometimes we would catch an Uber this night. I wasn't feeling too great, so I left a little early. It was somewhere between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock in the morning. It was way too cold to walk home. So I called for an Uber. A guy nearby named Alex pops up, and I gotta be honest, he was a little creepy looking. He was older, didn't really smile in his picture, and he had a grayish goatee with a black beanie cap on. He was only 2 miles away, so I didn't really care. It said he had a Chevy Malibu, which sounded nice, so I requested he come pick me up. I waited on the bench outside the club next to the bouncer, who stood still like a statue, hands folded together. About 5 minutes later, a silver 2003 or something Chevy Malibu pulled up in front of the club. I stood up a bit disappointed. It was such an old, ratty-looking car. The guy didn't call me over or honk or anything. He just waited by the curb, so I got up and entered the back seat of the car right away. Things got uncomfortable. He didn't say hello. He didn't shake my hands. He didn't even turn his head to look at me. All he said was in a very quiet voice, "Where are you headed to?" Which I replied with my address. We began moving down Main Street, but in the wrong direction of my house. I told him this, and he turned left at the next intersection. Now we were moving away from the main roads and down the quieter residential areas. He didn't put my address into his phone, so I felt really strange. I didn't know if he was expecting me to direct him or not. I ended up putting my address into my own phone so he could listen when the GPS said, "Turn left down the next street." He completely missed it. I made a confused hand gesture. He noticed it and said, "I just gotta make a quick stop. Don't worry, I'll give you a discount," even though I was drunk. I still knew something bad was going on then. That's when I noticed the handgun sticking out from his middle glove box next to him. By now, I was trying to figure out how to get out of this car at the next red light. I tried the door handle very quietly, but it wouldn't open. I saw that the child lock was on, and from this point forward, my heart was racing. The man was driving as far out of the direction of my house. We must have been 2 towns over by now. I was getting desperate. I couldn't call the cops because I didn't know what this guy might do. I figured my best option would be attempting to flick the trial block switch next to him by the front seats. I had to somehow slide over to the opposite side of the back seat behind him without him noticing. This was one of the most tense moments of my life. I lost my sight on his head. Through the rearview mirror, making sure he wasn't looking, I very casually slid behind him. Thankfully, he didn't notice. Now came the scariest part. I had to reach for the button up front at the next red light before he could do anything. Each light we passed, I felt more and more tension build up. As I was waiting for one of them to turn yellow, and eventually one finally did. He slowed the car at an intersection that would usually be busy during daylight hours. It was a perfect escape point. The car came to a stop. This light wasn't very long, so I had to be quick. The car was stopped at the opposite side of the intersection, which made me feel a little better. With all my courage, I reached my hand up to the lit-up child lock button, and I must have startled him because he jumped 2 inches out from the seat. He screamed at me. And as I feared he would, he went for the gun right next to him. I was able to open the door and flee to the nearby Cadillac Escalade, where I banged on their windows asking for help. They drove off, completely avoiding me. But it didn't matter because the man in his Chevy Malibu was already gone down the block. I ran into a nearby grocery store that was open 24 hours where I called the taxi. This time, this was a very sobering experience because I don't remember being drunk at all in that store or during the taxi ride home. I reported the driver to Ober, who said they would escalate the situation to the authorities. It wasn't until a whole week later that an officer finally showed up at my front door for some questioning, and that was the end of that. I have no idea what became of that guy, but I've never used an Uber since. Hello, everyone. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful or entertaining, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel. Your support motivates us to create more content you'll love. Thanks a million. And if you've just subscribed, please drop a comment saying I subscribed. We'd love to welcome you to our community.